This video is the third video in a series of videos about graphing trigonometric functions, which is one of the more challenging concepts in pre-calculus. In this video, I will discuss how to graph the cosecant of x and secant of x, and I will draw heavily from the content in the first video about how to graph sine of x and cosine of x. Now, when I think about the cosecant of x, I think about the cosecant of x being equal to 1 over the sine of x. And I graph it with that same thinking of 1 divided by whatever the sine of x is, and that will create a new graph, which is the cosecant of x. So here I have graphed in blue, this blue dotted line is the graph of y equals the sine of x. And I will create a new graph, which is cosecant of x, which, to remind us, is 1 over the sine of x at every point. Okay. Now, at this point, at 0, the sine of x is 0. And so that gives us 1 over 0, or an asymptote. Okay. The next value is pi fourths, and the sine of pi fourths is root 2 over 2. And so the cosecant of pi fourths is the reciprocal of that, or 2 over root 2, which simplifies to be simply root 2, which is about 1.414. So at pi fourths, I'm at 1.414, and it's roughly about right there. Okay. Now at pi halves, the sine of pi halves is 1. And so 1 over 1 is still 1. So it'll touch right here. And then back here at 3 pi fourths, the sine of 3 pi fourths is also root 2 over 2. And so 1 over root 2 over 2 gives me the same 1.414. So it's kind of bouncing back up here. And then at pi, this is 0, and so I have another asymptote. Okay, so what this looks like is it looks like a kind of a U shape like this. Okay, now so what happens at after pi, then I have let's see here, 5 pi fourths. The sine of 5 pi fourths is negative root 2 over 2. And so the cosecant of 5 pi fourths will be negative root 2. So I'm down here at a negative about approximately 1.414. Okay, and then at 3 pi halves, again, the sine of 3 pi halves is negative 1. And so 1 over negative 1 is also negative 1, as they meet right there. And then this is 7 pi fourths. And the sine of 7 pi fourths is also negative root 2 over 2. And so the cosecant of that is, again, our negative 1.414 right here. And then at pi halves, I have another asymptote because 1 over 0 is undefined. Okay, so the graph looks like this. Okay, and you'll see that whenever the sine of x crosses the x-axis, I get an asymptote. Okay, and then it'll kind of bounce up and down because it's the reciprocal of the sine of x. I'm sorry, that's backwards. Okay, and so the green is the graph of the cosecant of x. Next, we will look at the graph of secant of x. And I think of secant of x as 1 over the cosine of x. And we'll do something very similar to what we did with the cosecant of x, but now I'm thinking of secant as 1 over cosine. So now I have graphed in red y equals cosine of x, and I'm thinking of secant of x as 1 over cosine of x. Okay? Now, the same thing will happen as happened earlier, in that whenever cosine of x crosses the x-axis, I will get an asymptote. Okay, and for simplicity, I think that you'll hopefully understand that the same thing will happen as happened before, in that 1 divided by whatever the cosine is will give us kind of this reciprocal kind of bouncing, as I kind of like to think of it, as I'm going like that and like that, because 1 divided by whatever that number is will kind of create this kind of a graph for me. Okay, I know it's kind of going a little quick through that, but this is what the graph of secant of x will look like. Whenever the cosine is 1, 1 over 1 will be 1. And as this number gets smaller, then I have 1 divided by a small number, which is a large number. That creates my asymptote going off to infinity. Okay, so I know this is kind of really brief, but that's basically how you graph what the graph of cosecant of x and the graph of secant of x looks like. And I hope this video was helpful. Thank you.